This is the PowerApps Podcast from CRM Audio with your hosts, those dynamic guys, and Sean the CRM Hobbit Tabor. This episode is brought to you by MS CRM Add-ons Attachment Extractor. If you use the Common Data Service, you know that as cloud consumption increases, so do your storage costs. This is especially true for Microsoft Business Applications installations, where all incoming email attachments and documents that get uploaded as a note get stored into the database as a blob and consume considerable amounts of database storage. Attachments Extractor from mscrmaddons.com can provide a simple solution to this problem. It allows you to move files to either SharePoint, Azure Blob Storage, or a file share, and release valuable storage in your environment and decrease your storage cost. Typically, the add-on pays for itself within 1 year of use. Thanks to MSCRM Add-on's transparent way of transferring files, users won't see a difference when accessing the files from within Dynamics 365 or PowerApps. We thank MSCRM Add-ons for sponsoring the PowerApps Podcast from CRM Audio.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerApps Podcast, the podcast that's everything CDS, PowerApps, and Flow on the CRM Audio Network. Today, those Dynamics guys, specifically Kyle Hill and Chris Huntingford, are going to talk about ALM, a little bit about CDS, and are going to go into Solution Checker. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle. Take it away, boys.
Thanks for that introduction, Sean, and great to be part of the podcast again, and delighted to have Mr. Chris Huntingford join us.
Yeah, man, I felt a bit bad about not being able to join the last one, but I was on leave. I actually had a small break for a change, which was really cool. The wife confiscated the laptop, so I didn't even do any power apping for like 5 days. It was a bit weird, but it was good fun. So yeah, good to be back on the podcast.
That's about the first holiday I think you've ever had and not had access to tech. Was it tough?
Yeah, it was weird. You know what? It was really odd, but I think after about day 3, I didn't miss it. And then, I can't remember, I saw a tweet about something. It was actually the form designer that came up, and I'm like, give me my laptop.
So addiction took over.
Yeah,
I have to know.
This is it. So it was cool. And incidentally, you guys did the last discussion on that, so actually it worked out really well. It was good to learn some stuff as well. So yeah, good to be back.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot we discussed, and as I know that you're ever studious and you've caught up all the notes and things, and one of the things I'd really like to get your opinion on is around, we talked about it last episode, is the PowerApps Control Framework, and particularly, enabling business process flows. I think you've got some strong views on this.
Yeah. Okay. So firstly, I did try and actually get access to this functionality, and I wasn't able to. I might have missed something. I did speak to a few of my friends. So in particular, Sarah Lagerquist. She actually brought it up on one of the Black Ops groups. And I was like, okay, so I jumped on to try it out, and I actually couldn't find a way to get access to it. But that's besides the point. Just from a UK perspective, I didn't see it. It might be out in other regions. But I'm really excited about this functionality. I'm always excited about new stuff, but this stuff in particular. And the reason is because when you design, so when you're thinking about designing forms within PowerApps, you've got access to the Custom Control Framework, where you can, overlay fields with custom, or attributes at least, with custom controls. So my personal favorite, the Radial knob, chucking that onto a value control. And
the Radial knob, is that the one?
That's the one, man. That's my personal favorite. Yeah. So I really like it because it makes the user experience a hell of a lot better. One of the things I found is I'm actually building out some financial services IP just as a test for a lot of things, and I've been using a hell of a lot of them. But one thing I've noticed is that when I want to use these awesome custom controls, I kind of have to keep on jumping back onto the form to get access to them. What I thought would be really cool is if those were available in the business process bar. So when you have access to the business process, you want to try and stay within the business process as much as possible and follow the fields that are added to that process, their process view. Now, you don't have access to adding those PowerApps controls inside there. It's regular attributes. What would be amazing is if you can add those custom controls or those PowerApps controls to make the user experience a hell of a lot better. So I'm really excited about that. I think it'll actually change the way users use business process. One of the things I've seen in the past is that business processes, when you're creating them, overlaying multiple entities and guiding the user and providing governance, it's a ton of checkboxes. And people just like check next. They often don't even look what they're doing. Whereas I think that the new controls will really give the users a much better experience. So that's sort of where I am with it at the moment. I can't wait to get access to it and try it out properly. But like I said, I did give it a crack, and I wasn't able to get access.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's still busy rolling out to some of the geos. And one of the interesting things that I pick up from this is that we should, in theory, get smaller and smaller forms
Yes.
per entity. I mean, I've seen some forms with hundreds and hundreds of fields on. I can't imagine that's a good design by any measure. But do you think that we may be in danger here of becoming a bit of a sort of orchestration tool through the business process flow rather than a forms over data? And maybe that is by design.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't necessarily call it danger. I think we probably will. I think the whole idea here is to provide the users with a mechanism to better capture data, better manage their daily tasks, and undertake those types of interactions. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. The thing that I do worry about, though, is that you're still going to have the old school thinkers of adding hundreds of fields to a form. Let me actually give you an example of something that I did recently, where I was building out. I can't actually mention the functionality 100% purely because there's something else. It's around for a customer, but we before there were like hundreds of fields on a form and they were doing values. What we actually did was create a child entity that collected those values and rolled it up to a total on the primary form in the form of, again, a radial knob. Hey. And it did a comparison.
Good to see you using it.
Yeah, it's my favorite one, man.
feedback.
And the second best is the arc knob. There we are. So yeah, I mean, what we did was we actually split up the way that the data was captured, and that to me made the data on the form a lot. There was a lot less data on the form, but it meant a lot more. And I'm kind of hoping that with the introduction of these PowerApps controls into the business process, that moves from having all the stuff on a form and really provides a mechanism for guidance when the user captures information and interacts with information, not necessarily just plugging data into a form.
Yeah, I mean, I must agree, and I think it's also going to give a nice visual element to it. The business process flows are a bit bland, and there's quite a bit of white/grey space, so it will be more appealing to an end user and more interactive, from my opinion.
Oh, spot on. And also, it's going to make us think a bit more about design. Instead of like having linear fields in a random process, it's like, well, what really does the user need to see? What does the user really need to interact with to make their job easier and better, if that makes any sense? Like, it's just so interesting. I always go back to looking at those old business process flows when they were designed. I think they came out in 2013. And, they were cool. It was all very linear and fun, and I think the whole concept started there. But now, by design, when I recently did an implementation, actually. It wasn't just pre-sales, I actually was at the coalface, believe it or not.
So in the trenches.
I did some real stuff. And I was sitting with a customer, and I think from a consultancy perspective, this is important. Sitting with him, we were talking about this process flow and the movements of data and the flow of data, and they showed me this flow of, it was many, many different steps. And I actually said to him, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't really think that's a good idea. And the reason for that is because I feel like we could have, utilized fields better and added information, more useful information into the business process flow instead of making users, just click, click, click. It was really around, well, why are we capturing this data? What are we doing with it? And what does it mean in the flow? And then obviously that replicated back onto the form where we had custom controls. And I'm talking more custom control side of things, showing, a consolidated view of information. Now, it's not just saying, here's a cool way to view data. It's, well, this is what the data really means. And it's really interesting when you look at the arc knob control. It's kind of like, well, here's a start, here's an end. You are halfway, you might, depending on the data you capture, you're kind of halfway between the two. And from a user consumption perspective, like, I'm very visual, and the customer I was working with were very visual. When they saw that, they were like, oh man, let's put that in the top left so it's the first thing people see. And
Yeah.
I think that made a hell of a lot of sense to me. So when you're doing this in the business process flow, people aren't having to look all the way back down to the form. They're going, oh man, in this process, this is where we are. This is where it needs to be. This is super important. Let's progress to the next level or not based on, this visualization.
Yeah, I think it's just placing a lot of emphasis on the internal user. I mean, we typically focus on the end customer and helping those sorts of audience groups. We also shouldn't forget our internal users and say, look, the solution needs to be just as easy for them to get value out of. Otherwise, they're not going to use it as designed.
Oh, for sure. The interesting part, though, that I just want to talk about really quickly is from a technical perspective. Like, if you think about how simple custom controls were to add, I mean, it's actually, a lot of people think it's a dark art, but it's really simple. I'm starting to think that with the way that this is going to be built into the business process flow, it's going to be just as simple. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think we're going to see sort of Canvas apps be just a variation of the PowerApps Control Framework by design. The CRM form today, the CE form today, I think that concept is going to fall away, and you're going to see this process. Basically, that's what your form over data is going to evolve into, and it's all going to be focused on getting these outcomes by presenting valuable information, not hundreds of fields, just the valuable information to the user at that point in time.
I totally agree. I'm actually very excited for this, and I'm going to keep on. I'll keep an eye on sort of what's being released. But the minute I can, literally, the minute I see this stuff out, I'm going to create a video. Whether it's good or
whether it's good or not.
Whether my video is good or not is another story. But you know how I roll, man. If it's there, it must be shared.
So I want to pick up on something we spoke a little bit about, and having hundreds of fields on the form and some of the good and best practices and such like. Now, we mentioned in the last episode, but the solution checker. Maybe do you want to just give us a run through of your experience with it, how we go about installing it in an environment, what it's all about?
Yeah. Okay, so actually it wasn't very difficult to get loaded in. So it was available in AppSource. All I did was I popped in, installed the solution checker. It actually creates a little solution for you within your Maker experience. So if you were to hop into apps and solution, and you took a look at the apps you had, it creates an app called Solution Health Hub.
Are we talking model apps here, just to be clear?
Yeah, I am talking model apps, absolutely, yeah. When you log into your solutions, you'll actually see a solution file called the PowerApps checker. So it's pretty straightforward. The one thing that this is quite an obvious statement, but you don't run the solution checker against Canvas apps. So it's focused primarily on model-driven applications. When I gave this a crack, so I decided to give it a try. I wasn't sure. I actually didn't really know what to expect or how this whole thing was going to work. So here's what I found, right? I popped in. All I simply did was clicked on my application, and I thought, okay, cool, let's have a look. And all it really said to me was, run solution checker. So I ran it, and I got an Excel file, and the Excel file had one line in it, and it said to me, this app basically works.
I'm super excited. You did a great job.
Promote
to promotion.
I was genuinely confused. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm trying to see if I can find the exact wording, but I posted it on LinkedIn because I was like, okay, this is epic. So the exact wording was, give me a sec. Let's see if I can find it. It was something like, your solution is ready, or it was just one of those things. Give me a moment. I just found it really interesting. Oh, your solution looks great.
One of the scenarios where the Microsoft marketing budget had run out. So.
Your solution looks great. The check completed successfully and no issues were identified. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? So I ran this and I'm like, all right, that's pretty good. I hope. So I ran it against another random solution that I had in there, and I got an error, and it said, you have a blob storage error with this long GUID. Okay, so I'm like, all right, I don't really understand what I'm supposed to do with all of this now. It pushed me onto an XML page and showed me all this information. So I thought, okay, no problem. I started exploring a little more, and I actually opened up the solution checker, and I saw tons of stuff in there. I mean, there was processes, dialog boxes, tons of SDK message processing. There were actually business processes. There's a plugin in there. I thought, okay, and a few entities. And I thought, well, for an application or a solution that looks fairly complex, why does it spit out the single Excel line to me telling me that this stuff works, or like an XML file? after digging a little deeper, when you actually go and check out your applications within the system, you go into Solution Health Hub, it actually opens up a model-driven app that gives you sort of active analysis jobs. It'll give you analysis components and analysis results, as well as the Solution Health rule sets. Now, I don't know what all of those mean, but when I went into the results, the analysis results, not analysis results, when it's the analysis jobs, you can actually see the solution jobs that have been run against the relevant package. So that actually was pretty cool. It didn't give me too much more details. When I got an exception, it gave me a very basic exception, but that was really it. So I posted on LinkedIn. I got a message from Microsoft, and they were like, well, we're going to be, upgrading this and building as we go, which is very exciting. But how cool is this, right? So it doesn't just stick out a random Excel file. It gives you an actual view inside a model app of stuff that's been run, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm very, very excited for this thing to grow. I don't know where it's going to go, but from what Microsoft are saying, this thing's going to be epic. And from my perspective, it'll be the go-to, checker as far as like the CDS functionality goes.
Yeah, I think from my initial trials with it, it's been far more focused at sort of custom developed resources, your plugins, your HTML web resources, your scripts, etc.
Yeah.
And trying to make those conform to, the new single version story that Microsoft's preaching at the moment. Everybody online, everybody the same version is their ideal. And I think this solution is really going to help a lot of people who are doing these cloud, migrations and saying we're bringing with a lot of technical debt, this legacy functionality.
Oh yeah.
What's potentially going to be an issue there, and how can we sort of reverse that out of there and give you, pieces like Canvas apps that will, or business process flows with PowerApps embedded, and say, look, these are better options here, and these are supported correctly, and help the adoption of the platform that way.
Yeah, the thing that I found incredibly interesting though was when you look on the docs site, it says you're going to be checking for performance and reliability issues to reduce the risk for your accommodator service for apps implementation. Now, that's awesome. What I'd like to know is a little bit more around what's behind for performance and reliability issues. So what does that mean? What are they? And I guess we'll find out, obviously, once we drill into it a bit more and once more releases come out. But what are they actually looking for?
So I think maybe what we can do is we'll include the link to the solution checker and how you can get it up and running in your environment, and maybe we'll get some members of the audience out there just to contribute, and maybe they've got a really complex legacy deployment that they'd like to run this against, and see some of the insights, and then we can discuss those on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my goal is I want to get to that sort of that kind of really rich set of results that will really, really help me. Because right now, what I got was pretty basic. It did give me enough information. It gave me some information, but not really enough for me to know exactly what I need to fix. So, like Microsoft said, they are improving. This is an initial release, but what I'm hoping for is some really, really beastie, sort of chunky information that will help me progress.
Yeah, and I think it is a step in the right direction from Microsoft. We never used to have these tools available to us. You used to do your deployment, it would fail. You would try and hunt through the logs and work out why, and then do it again. I think this is the first of many steps around helping your IT pros and your IT developers, cater for these scenarios, and more specifically, get people into the cloud, get the mass into the cloud, and get rid of this dependency on premise.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree with you. I think the cloud is absolutely 1000% the place to be. So,
with that being said, let's have a little talk about ALM, Application Lifecycle Management. Yeah, something that I'm sure you're not too worried about in pre-sales, but it's quite an important mechanism in most delivery teams. And trying to understand, with these cloud-based and browser-based models, is ALM a front of mind topic for most? And there are some deep experts out there that will contribute huge amounts on the subject, but let's take it from your perspective, Chris, and what you've got to say.
I'm slowly lifting off my cowboy hat. and putting it on the floor and putting on my
cowboys are synonymous.
Putting my hats of responsibility on. So it's a real interesting one. So as you well know, I work in pre-sales, which means that it's a little bit different for me with regards to ALM, and the reason for that is because typically when we build stuff, it's primarily around proof of concepts, demonstrations, etc., etc. However, I have done a fair amount of time in support and maintenance as well as delivery, and I get absolutely why this is 100% important. Now, the thing that bothers me though is how do you enforce ALM standards? And essentially within when you're looking at the management of solutions, etc., etc., it's only really as good as the team around it that pushes it. So when you're looking at working through things like Azure DevOps, etc., fine, you can manage a lot of the rules there, but it seems that PowerApps and Dynamics, effectively provide, or the Maker experience provides you with an element of application lifecycle management, and it allows you to kind of manage various things. It gives you the functionality to do it. But if you don't have those rules in place, people like me, and from a pre-sales perspective, I can just create my own solutions, do my own thing, go absolutely berserk, and just add as much stuff as I'd like. So I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but I think there first and foremost needs to be some sort of business mechanism to help you manage this type of stuff.
Well, I think it's more fundamental than that. Hosting some of the hackathons that we have, one of our biggest challenges that we have is that participants want to edit the same app at the same time.
Yep.
And in today's world, the browser's just going to say, thank you, but the app is locked for editing by another user.
You're talking about Canvas apps right now.
Canvas apps in this scenario, and that makes it really quite difficult. You could potentially download it and work on it offline, and then upload it and overwrite somebody else's changes. So there's definitely some work to be done there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see.
Or is there?
I think there is. I think the Visual Studio Code guys, that whole experience, they'll be able to tie in. They're all online Microsoft services now, and provide some elements there. And if you look at the model-driven side of things, there's lots of ALM capabilities, like you mentioned, around Azure DevOps. All the Visual Studio world out there. There's all sorts of pipelines, plugins, and such that can facilitate it. But I don't see it filtering through, particularly on the Canvas app side of things. And I think that's a bit of a hole at the moment. That's fast being filled, but does make it a little bit challenging in the enterprise.
See, I don't know if I agree with you. And the reason for that is because when you're building out things like model apps, you do have a little bit more control. With Canvas apps, because it's so design heavy, it's really difficult to go to say, okay, well, we want multiple people to work on the same Canvas app. Okay, sure, I can get why it's important, but there has to be some way to maybe do it like per screen or something. I remember when I used to do web dev in Dreamweaver many moons ago. This was a nightmare as well.
Born, obviously.
And actually, we use Microsoft Expression as well, believe it or not. I still don't code.
Before I was born.
Dude, it's next level. But if you think about it, right? Do I really want someone else working on the same Canvas app as me? And right now, can I be honest? I don't, because I'm quite sticky about the way that I do my design work and stuff. What I might want to do, and also the other thing is, I still think in Canvas apps, when you're looking at dealing with things like code, and loads of other, well, your at least your expressions, it's so easy to overwrite things. And if you, I'm a control freak, if you're looking at sort of the 100-acre woods via personality types, I'm definitely rabbit. I don't want people messing around with my stuff. And what's important for me is that if somebody starts messing around with my Canvas app, I need to be able to maintain the control. So this is more of a me thing than a solution thing. Whereas if you're starting to open this up to more people editing Canvas apps, I don't know if that's a good thing. I need to wrap my mind around it a bit more. But when we tried to do it, the way that everyone's doing things is so different. It actually ended up breaking. And with the hackathon, when we did the hackathon, what people did is they built their own apps and then merged them, and it actually worked really well.
Yeah. So I think that's an important fact, because if you are going to be in control singularly of a Canvas app, that is going to introduce some sort of linear dependencies where you'll
Correct.
need to do your build, then you'll need to check this, then you'll need to do that, then you'll need to test that, and then etc. etc. So in terms of best utilizing your available resources, maybe not ideal, but maybe that is by design. I think it's going to be interesting to see some of the examples that have been put out there. The PowerApps community champions have got some fairly significant PowerApps there, which I'm sure are not maintained by one person.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that.
That person gets hit by a bus, it also can be a bit challenging to pick up what they've left behind.
Yeah, but then I think it comes down to making sure that the app's documented correctly. Your basically everything shared with the right people. I just don't know if multiple people on one app at the same time is ever wise, especially from a design perspective. Model apps, sure, totally, I get it. I mean, absolutely 1000%. But Canvas apps, I'm still in a different place, man. I probably need to mature a little bit in my thinking on it.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what approach Microsoft takes, because I can't imagine that we're the only two having this sort of debate. And I think, from my technical background, from your more functional background, we're seeing two different sides here, which is great. And Microsoft will hopefully listen to both sides and come up with an amazing solution that will cater for both Canvas and for Model.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with you.
Chat about it on the show.
It's going to be interesting, man. I think the ALM discussion, it's been here since the beginning, and it's always going to be here. And regardless of what you're using and what platform you're using, it's always relevant. But like I said, based on my limited experience in things like large delivery projects, I can only speak for what I know. But what I can tell you is I can put my code cowboy hat back on and carry on with what I do, right?
Well, with your cowboy hat on, maybe let's talk about the final topic for today's podcast, and that's all around some best practices for CDS solutions.
Oh man, yeah.
You've come from the CRM world and customer engagement world now, where there are some best practices around solutions, not using the default solution and renaming fields and such like. So, what would you recommend in terms of best practices for the listeners around CDS solutions?
Never edit the default solution ever in the world. Don't ever touch it. Leave it alone. Don't mess with it.
You feel strongly about this?
Dude, man, it's... I've had a very, very, very long week with this type of stuff. No, so I personally work by a number of rules when it comes down to best practice and this type of thing. Now, one thing that I do believe in is, number one, I create my own solution. So I build up my own solution, I create my own solution publisher, I set up my own prefix so I know what I've done, I work within the solution, right? And it's not a managed solution. So for Gus Gonzalez, there you go, buddy. I'm not a massive fan. I think that they have their place, but for me, that's what I do. And then essentially, there's a lot of rules that I set out. So I try my level best to avoid entity and field Armageddon. So when you're looking at like a naked CDS environment, you get a lot of different entities out the box. I mean, if you get account, contact, multiple activity entities, there's a few others. But I always try and leverage what I can that are available out the box within the CDS, and then obviously build on top and alongside it with custom entities and custom attributes. Like I said, I work within my solution. I do not, when it's existing entities, I do not edit default views, default forms, default anything. I leave them as they are, and I create my own set of forms and my own set of views. It's super easy, save as, and then build on top of that. I feel as if you're setting yourself up for failure if you're editing everything default, and I don't think it's a very good idea at all. The one primary thing that I do really like to do though is I always create when I, from a best practice perspective, I always make sure that my naming convention is the same and it's easy to find stuff. So when I'm creating fields and that, I don't just add tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of fields. I actually really think about them before I stick them in. And my rules are: is this field necessary in the business process flow? Is this field necessary in the report? And is this field necessary from a user perspective? Like, will it give them insight into what's going on? If I can answer those three questions from a field and functionality perspective, I'll continue. If I can't and somebody asks me to add something, my initial response is why? What will you get out of it? And look, there's a load of other different things, but I try my level best to use what I can out the box. from a functionality perspective. In fact, it's interesting because I haven't had to use a lot of custom code in a very long time. But I am speaking from pre-sales and some delivery here. I've managed to get by with using what's available out the box, and it's been very useful for me. So, like again, if you can take anything from this, just don't mess with the default stuff. Leave it alone. That's like rule number one.
I mean, I think it's interesting because it does, from what I pick up from what you're saying, put a number of different solutions together based on what they actually do, prefix them as necessary, avoid, modifying the default forms, create your own versions of those so that you can quickly, move them between solutions and not overwrite default functionality or default views or anything similar. And again, don't overwrite and rename things that are already there. They're designed in a fashion, and if they don't work for you, maybe the best practice is to just hide them and then just show it again.
Oh, absolutely. I do that. I do that a fair amount. Like when there's some things that I do that might not be the best idea, but a lot of the time I'll give you a random example on my forms. I'll have an admin tab, right, and it actually works out quite well within the user interface. So I'll have an admin tab, and there'll be things in there that I use across the actual entity itself, but it doesn't necessarily mean users need access to it. So I really, really work hard at only showing users what they really need to see. I've just found that, when the minute I see a form with hundreds and hundreds of fields on it, I'm like, well, how's the user experience? Is this actually being used? What's going on? And it's I suppose form design is one thing, but, from a very best practice perspective, only really add stuff if you have to. And obviously, that's what we do for a living. We configure PowerApps and we configure dynamics essentially, but my real goal is I try to use what I can with what's there.
Yeah. So I mean, I would extend that a little bit and say, with only having what you need there, also be very conscious of the dependencies you may introduce.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Wherever possible, spin up a CDS environment and build your solution there without building it in a full dynamic CE instance. So remove the dependencies on some of the pre-built solutions there, whatever they may be. And sometimes they're not clearly visible until you export a solution and try and import it into an environment. So a really important little nugget of gold that we've run into that with the hackathons a couple of times.
Yes.
And sometimes you've got no idea why it brings dependency in, and you really don't want to be trying to troubleshoot that when you're supposed to be going live with the solution.
In fact, that it's really awesome that you brought that up. Do you remember, I think it was one of the very first CDS solutions I built, like naked CDS, and I had a CE environment sort of running parallel to it.
Yeah.
And I built it in the CE environment purely because there were like one or two entities that I needed in there. And I don't know, I wanted to try and see if I could do it. And I ended up building out this entire thing with so many different like relational pieces and reliances. I scrapped it and I went back to CDS and I built it up from the ground up. And the way that I've built stuff now is that I kind of make it pluggable, so I can snap it into any instance if I need to, without causing too much trouble. And that's worked pretty well for me. And right now, I think I've probably built out now about a number of full, completely naked CDS solutions that can be exported and imported at will. And I found that working from the ground up has actually been a hell of a lot easier than whittling stuff away.
Yeah, and I mean that's a typical dynamic CRM, dynamic CE approach, is to take the full suite and whittle it down. And I think you're spot on there, Chris. We want to build these snap-in modules, if you will, and build them from the ground up. You'll already have your common CDS components that you can leverage, but you don't have to start removing other bits that you don't necessarily need.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because I think now, like, I've learned, and I don't expect everyone to have the same opinion or be in the same place, but I think now that I've learned sort of how all this stuff fits together and why it fits together that way, I feel like, at the moment, the way that I'm designing stuff in CDS is I've had to change the way that I think. Yeah. I've taken off my CE goggles, put on Power Platform goggles, and actually it's been a hell of a lot more interesting and a hell of a lot more fun because you're creating something that's completely, unreliant on anything else. Obviously with account and contacts in there, that's pretty important, but the rest of it it's amazing to work from the ground up and really create something from scratch. So, well, not from scratch. Let's say from a naked CDS point of view.
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we'll end the show there on that note, and
Cool.
One of the topics that we'll pick up next week is thinking about forward looking. Trying not to replicate solutions in a CDS solution that Microsoft provide as a first party solution.
Yeah.
There are some restrictions around that, and obviously you don't want to reinvent the wheel unless it's absolutely necessary, which should be never.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree. Yeah.
And on that note, what we'll do is we'll include some links in the show notes to the solution checker and how you can install that in your environment. So hopefully we'll get some feedback around that. We'll also include a white paper from Microsoft which will illustrate some of the coding standards around Canvas apps, which they believe are sort of best practice, and you should recognize some of your familiar PowerApps champions in there. And then finally for next weekend, we'll look at some of those solutions we just spoke about now. But Chris, maybe tell us a little bit quickly on Power Summits in Europe and what that's all about and whether or not you'll be there.
I'd love to be there. So it'll be the first proper PowerApps, I guess, PowerApps get together or PowerApps convention that's more global than anything else. But yeah, it's going to be great. I'm not speaking at that. I'll be speaking at the D365 user group summit. I think it's at the same time. I can't actually remember.
Yeah, it is. It's all in Amsterdam.
That's
it.
The
last week of March.
That's it. So I'll probably go and crash a few sessions at the PowerApps summit. But it's quite cool because they're leaving me in Amsterdam for a week.
Danger.
But you can expect to see. I'm pretty sure you can expect to see all of your favorite PowerApps champions there. Go and collect some playing cards. It'll be fun. It's gonna be a geek fest, which I really can't wait for.
Yeah, and I think for those of you listening, a couple of months away, if you can get over there, number one, the content will be fantastic. You'll get to meet a lot of these PowerApps champions in person, and Amsterdam's a great place to be. Chris has only been lost there, I think, 4 or 5 times now?
Dude, I've never been there. They've actually kept me away from Amsterdam for good reason, but now I'm
lost so badly that he doesn't even remember being there.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm very excited for it. I think that, man, the way that the places that Microsoft are taking this platform is unbelievable. So you can expect to see some pretty intense stuff at that summit.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us and being back as part of the fold. Hopefully Will join us next week. He's having train problems again. We need to build him a train, scheduling PowerApp or something. But yeah, thanks again.
Cool.
Yes.
Ciao, man.
This has been the PowerApps Podcast from CRM Audio. Send us your feedback at mail@powerappspodcast.com. Check out other episodes from the CRM Audio Network by going to CRM Audio in your browser or searching for CRM Audio on Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, any place else that you can find podcasts. This is a production of Dynamics Podcast LLC.